Welcome to The Aftermath, a podcast that rips the Band-Aid off the collective scars of divorce, custody battles, and the trauma of family drama. Kendra Reiber and Mick Smith pull back the curtain and explore stories that put the heart-wrenching puzzle pieces together with inspiring stories, notable experts, and actionable tips. Let the healing begin. Well, welcome once again to The Aftermath, and this is Mick, the Doctor of Digital, and Kendra, a co-parenting mentor. How are you today, Kendra?
I'm wonderful, Mick. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. You know, we want to bring people up to speed on some of our supporters and sponsors. So before we get to Claudia, who will be interviewing today, let me tell you a little bit about Marnie Hill Foderaro. And we had her on the show back a while. She had a talk at Columbia University on how spirituality and writing can lead to recovery. She completed books 6 and 7 of her True Deceit, False Love series, soon to be released. And you can check out the happening section of her website, God Came to My Garage Sale. I love that title, God Came to My Garage Sale.com. So with that, we want to welcome Claudia. And Claudia has got an interesting background. She is a veteran, so we thank for her service. And also, she's got a lot of court experience, and that's something that a lot of us have benefited from once we got there. She's a part of Victim to Hero. She's got case studies. She's been in court before, and she all is very interested in reunification. So welcome to the program, Claudia. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Mick. Thanks, Kendra, for bringing me here.
Yeah, thank you for your time, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
So we wanted to dive into custodial interference, but we also would like to know a little bit more about you, because I gave you a brief introduction. Just tell us a little bit more about yourself before we get started in depth.
Sure. So I'm a Marine veteran. I'm a Texas resident. My spouse is also a veteran, so I considered myself a military spouse at one point before he retired. I'm also an advocate. I advocate for a national parents organization, my own organization, Heroes for Children's Rights. I've worked and collaborated with other, organizations and parents on certain projects, but my main focus has been on custodial interference and that connection to alienating behaviors and how it impacts, children of divorce.
So maybe we can start out with the basic definition. What is custodial interference?
So custodial interference is when a parent or an individual withholds or retains a child against a court order from the other parent, interrupting that parent-child relationship. It is a law in every state. It's been around for over 40 years. In some states, it's a misdemeanor, but in majority, it's an actual felony. It's a penal code, and so this law has been around since the Adam Walsh Act and the Missing Children's Act of 1982. Every state has it, but it's just not well known, and a lot of parents don't realize that it has existed and has been around. For over 40 years.
Can it be called something else in different states depending on where you're at?
Yes, so it varies. In California, it's like deprivation of child custody. Texas is interference with child custody. Some states it's called parental kidnapping. Majority of states it's basically custodial interference in some form of the term, but it actually has a penal code, so that number varies, and every parent would need to be familiar with their state statute, because every state is different on how the law is written. So you have to look for those details.
Claudia, before we move forward, can you just define what penal code means, please, for those that don't know?
Sure. So in family court, civil court, most times we talk about family code when we're talking about our court orders. In criminal code, it's penal code. So it could be Penal Code 278.5. That's the penal code for the state of California. In Texas, is Texas Penal Code 2503. In Florida, it's 787.03. So it all varies, but these codes are found under the criminal code, not the family code. And so these are the codes that majority of the time attorneys will not understand because they practice family law, not criminal law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very good for our listeners to understand. So usually when we talk divorce, we're talking custody, family court, lawyers in that aspect. today's a little different because we're going to really address where there's a criminal aspect to it. So thank you very much for defining that. But I want to
And
back up before we get into too much detail. Can you tell us, as you mentioned before, the biggest impact of this is the children. So how does it affect their mental well-being?
Well, when, most times before divorce, there's that bond or that relationship that the child has, and then we experience divorce. And when a child is denied that visitation or that parenting time or that relationship, it damages that relationship. And that's where we see that alienating behaviors come from, when the child is not allowed to see you, when the relationship just starts getting chipped away, they don't have those experience with you anymore. And many times children are also not encouraged to see you, especially when they get a little bit older. They won't, the other parent will not encourage their relationship, which is also custodial interference, because most times they'll just leave it up to the child to decide. And we know that's wrong, to put the child in that position. So it, over time, it just damages the relationship. And to have both parents involved is what's important. And that's what's important to me, is ensuring both parents are involved. But when I focus or advocate, it's more on the child. What is this doing to the child?
and this is kind of interesting, I think. I don't know about you, Kendra, but I'm saying this is now for 40 years, and it's all 50 states. And I go, this is almost like a mystery, because I think there are a lot of people who are unaware of this. And it's also really important when you distinguish between where this is, that it's a part of the criminal penal code as opposed to family court, which is what you're suggesting and saying maybe that's why the attorneys miss this. But that's really an important distinction. So I appreciate that and pointing that out. But it's been around for a long time, and it is all 50 states. Could you talk a little bit about some of the emotional effects of custodial interference? In other words, why is it, and what kind of emotions can be attributed negatively to custodial interference?
Well, most times when a parent gets law enforcement involved, they're frustrated because they have a piece of paper, they have a court order that,
Mhm.
you know, basically directs them where they're supposed to pick up their child, for how long. All that's been agreed to, and it's written and it's stamped, by the court, and the judge has signed it, and so it's a binding agreement. And yet when they show up, whether it's at a McDonald's, at a home, or a police substation, and they're denied, they're very frustrated. So they turn to law enforcement, hoping that they're going to be able to do something. But about 99% of the time, they tell them it's a civil matter. You need to call your attorney. You need to go back to court. And that's where you get even more frustrated, is because I've already been to court. I came from court, and I have this order, and I just want to see my child. And so we've learned along the way, myself and a few other advocates, what we need to do to get them to help us. Many times law enforcement themselves don't know that this law has existed for so long, because that when you hear child custody, you automatically assume that this is a family court issue, but that's not true. Each criminal code is written specifically, and it's black and white, and it just tells you, it's interference. It explains it very well. And so in my own experience, I got denied the very first time, and I was frustrated, and I asked my attorney, why isn't anything done? Because if this is a binding order, why is it when I call them, they don't help me? They can't help me. And so she didn't even know. My attorney didn't know this law had existed. And
Well, and what's bad too, Claudia, right, is when we run into that frustration, the only thing that's ever done in family court is a contempt.
right,
And depending on what your attorney, suggests or what happens, those contempts can be piled up. The judge might not want to hear those until one certain time, or they can hear them one-offs, but it could take a while to get that contempt, right? In the meantime, you've missed 3 other visitations have been denied. So that's the frustrating part. And I think Mick can relate too. And he's gone through this, and that was years ago. And, I've been going through it for the last 4 years, and I didn't know this was a thing, a criminal thing.
Yep.
right,
Like I say, I can relate, because I'll give you an example where this is exactly what I had the order, and I had a copy And the police officer said, well, you don't have the court official document with the raised seal of the court. I'm like, well, no, of course I don't have that. I have a copy of it, but they didn't know what to do. They couldn't enforce it. And just what Kendra said, this was on a Friday evening, supposed to see the child for the weekend. Well, they lost the weekend. Yeah, call my attorney on Monday. Well, how does that help me for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday? But yeah.
Right, right. And so it's just very costly to go back to family court. And most times it's a slap on the wrist. Don't do it again. And then the next visit, they do it again. And it costs you thousands of dollars just to go, before the judge to enforce the order, file a contempt. And you can't get this makeup time. That's even harder because now either the child's back at school or summer is over. And it's just really frustrating. And so this was just something that I had learned, and any roadblock, I would just ask, because throughout the whole custody experience, I trusted everything that my attorney was telling me. I trusted the court, I trusted the professionals. And then when this happened, I just started questioning a lot more. There was nothing wrong now with questioning.
No, well, we all have to trust. We've never been through it before, right? So we have to trust somebody, and we trust those professionals that have done it over and over. What we learn is they don't always have the right answers, and you still have to be your own advocate.
Right.
How can custodial interference be a form of emotional abuse?
Well, most times I've learned this because I pulled public records, and when I pulled public records in my own city, a lot of these calls are categorized under domestic disturbances. And that's where I feel the domestic violence statistics are so high, because these numbers are so high. And in San Antonio alone, we average about 1,000 a month. And this is in a city that's about 1.5 million. If you want to, you want to encompass that it's within a county. You got 1.5 million people, and at least 1,000 children a month for a 4-year period are being withheld from the other parent. So when you get these calls into dispatch, they categorize them as domestic disturbances. And out of those 1,000, only a handful are going to be actually written or reported as custodial interference. And then only a handful of those are actually going to be making it to the district attorney's office to be prosecuted. So it's a small number, but many times it's because parents don't realize that when they're reporting this crime, it's not an incident report in our situation here in San Antonio. That's what is a difference. There's an incident report and there's an offense report. An incident report is just an informational, they enter your information. You could pick up a copy a couple of days later, give it to your attorney, see if they could use it in family court. An offense report is reporting the felony, where it actually gets escalated to an investigator in a special victims unit, some criminal investigation division, and it just gets escalated. And that's where they'll take your statement, they'll want your evidence. And back to your question, I'm sorry, because I got off topic a little bit. It's just that you just learned this process, and then you can now, you have another avenue or another remedy to the child being withheld from you. And law enforcement, many don't know that this law exists, but there are a few that do. And those are the ones that could be very helpful.
Well, and if not, I'm sure we can help educate them too, right? I mean, that's
Yes.
part of what we do. So, yes.
Yeah, it's a great question. And like a follow-up on this, how can enforcing custodial interference promote accountability? And I think this is the goal. Like, how do we get that other person who's not cooperating? How do we get them to be accountable? How can this help the enforcement?
Well, I mean, when I first started advocating, the idea wasn't to really get the parent in trouble. I wanted to just see my son. I wanted to have my visit. I wanted that to be reciprocated. There was no ever a time I wasn't going to return the child. I just want to have my visit and keep my relationship strong and growing. And so when we want to do this, we just want to make sure that our orders are enforced. So we paid thousands of dollars for them. We have an agreement. So you just want the other parent to comply. And unfortunately, many times they just won't comply no matter what's written. And that's where it hurts the relationship. It frustrates the parent. And by that time, you're just looking for another form of remedy, because what's happening in family court is not, it's not helping us. There is no accountability. They don't want to, you know, they don't want to put parents in jail either. They don't want to fine them. They just want them to, like, hey, just don't do it again. But it continues to happen. And so this way we have something to hold them accountable, and, you know, and be able to have that relationship with the child.
So what are the legal rights of parents in a court-ordered custody agreement?
It depends on how the court order is written, whether you have a standard possession order, or you receive, your visitation, you have a longer summer, you have every other major holiday. Most times it's, showing up at a specific location at a specific time, and, picking up your child, having them for so many days, and then returning them back per the order. I always tell parents to stick to the order. And it's very helpful when your order is very specific, because if there are loopholes, law enforcement is not going to want to, enforce it. Let's say you're supposed to be meeting at a certain destination, but you sidetrack and you decide to meet at a McDonald's and they don't show up. Well, you can't enforce McDonald's because that was never specified in your order. So you need to make these orders specific to, the agreement, and you need to stick to them, because they're not going to be able to get enforced. Some parents think, well, I don't have a court order. How do I enforce custodial interference? You need to look at your laws. This is no different from reporting child abductions. It's the same initial reporting process, is getting law enforcement to come to the location. You can't make this over the phone. And a lot of parents think that I'm going to call them and they're going to give me a number. No, they have to witness the felony. So if there's no child, they're witnessing that there is no child. So they could see for themselves that you're here, the other parent isn't here. Therefore, them as law enforcement are actually witnessing the crime occur because there's no child.
So Claudia, I do this to Mick all the time. I'm going to sidestep for just a second. Couple of things. If you have Mick laughs, right?
A good side step.
If you have been a parent who has been frustrated, you're hearing about this for the first time, and you've kind of sidestepped or stopped working through family court, or maybe you have all of those contempts built up, but you haven't seen your child for, a certain amount of time. Have you seen success where a parent can start filing to see their child and start filing this criminal charge against them?
Right. Yes, because civil court and criminal court are separate. And the example I always use is the O.J. Simpson case. He wasn't found guilty in criminal court, but the family took him to civil court for the exact same thing, and the family was successful in civil court. So when you're going through civil court, family court, there's nothing in the law that says you can't pursue criminal charges. There's nothing that's in there. I'll take that back. The only state that I've seen where they tell you have to go to civil court first is North Carolina. So there's nothing in your family code that says you can't go seek criminal, you can't report this criminally. Your attorneys often will not want you to, cause these issues by calling the police. But there's nothing in the law that says you can't. I have a right to report a crime. And that's normally when an officer tells me we're not going to do this. I ask them, are you denying me of my right to report a crime? Because a crime has occurred.
And what happens if you show up, the other parent is there, and the child refuses to go, and you have the officer there? You have to have the officer there, correct?
Yes.
What if the child refuses to go? How is that handled criminally? Because in custodial, right, they say I can't force the child to go with you, or in custody, right? In family court, the policeman's not going to enforce that. Law enforcement's not going to enforce that. So what happens at that point? Do they just have to witness it? Is that what you're talking about, the offensive report or offense report?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they have to witness it. But what I've learned is to understand what the definition of a child or minor is in my state. And if my order says this child, my child's initials will visit this parent, I define to the officer what the definition of a child is. It's not up to the child officer, this is the definition. And I had to go before a board in my police department because I made a huge issue that they didn't understand the difference. Like, you're going to leave it up to a child to decide when the definition by state law is any individual under the age of 18. My son was 15. He has no decision making here on visitation. And so I had to educate this board about it. So I tell parents to look up the definition of a child and minor in your state. Every state law is different. In some states, you can't enforce if the child is 16 or above. In some, it just varies. So I always tell parents, look up your laws, read your laws, and look up the definition of a child. And most times they'll use that the child doesn't want to go, but yet there are no bags packed. They didn't even inform the child. So they're really not encouraging the child to go and be ready. Most times it's about having the child ready, and you tell the child you're going to go visit, and that's it. And I'll also use the example, you don't leave it up to the child to decide to eat ice cream for dinner. You don't leave it up to the child to decide whether he's going to go to school or not the next day. You don't do those things. So why would you leave visitation up to the child? And law enforcement, I've had some very helpful law enforcement that will say, you know what, most times parents want to stick around because they put a lot of pressure on the child at the time. And law enforcement will say, you know what, you need to get out of here. This child needs to go with that parent, but they're not because you're here. You need to leave. And I've had parents come back and tell me that they had an officer that way, and it was so helpful because they knew what was happening. And they also said, you know what, you can nudge your child to get in the car. That's not a crime, nudging your child to get inside the car. And the child did. And as the minute that the other parent's gone, they're in the car buckled up, the atmosphere has changed. The child is now, normalizing, and they're, excited about the visit, but it's that pressure when that other parent's there.
Yeah, so I have not a sidestep, but I have an editorial comment, because I think the problem is it's parents who are too permissive. And that's what I can appreciate here, because it's like saying for all these other decisions, the child has no say so. And you tell the child what they should and should not do. And likewise, it's a court order, and it's up to the parents to be a parent and direct the child. This is what you're going to do. Here is the order. I'm going to comply, and I'm also going to ask you to comply. And if you don't, there'll be a little bit more pressure. So I think it's a little bit of the permissive parenting, which sometimes, at least in my generation, didn't exist. This is what mom and dad said. But a related question to that is what comes to mind. How can the enforcing the custodial interference protect the legal rights of parents? Because that's the person who is the adult, and it's really the legal rights of the parent that is at risk here. That's what I think the key question is.
Right. And so when parents, get familiar with the law, they also need to get familiar with their Victims' Bill of Rights. Every state has a Victims' Bill of Rights. And in some states, it's called Marsy's Law. It was named after a tragedy that had occurred in one of the states, but I believe it was 9 states that adopted Marsy's Law as a title of their Victims' Bill of Rights. And the Victims' Bill of Rights will tell you the steps of what law enforcement is supposed to do, how they're supposed to treat you, how the district attorney is supposed to treat you, how they're supposed to expedite these cases. And nowhere in there does it say, if you're in family court, this doesn't apply to you. So when these officers want to deny you, they can't pick and choose what laws to enforce. It's a law. It's already been legislated. It's already gone through the whole, legal legislative council. It's already legislated. That's it. So for them to try to give their opinion, or this doesn't apply, or the child's with the mother, they're not, there is no custodial interference. That's where parents need to become very familiar with the law. They need to be a little bit more assertive. I'm not saying be aggressive, but be assertive, because you do have rights as a parent, and all you want to do is report a crime. Mm-hmm. You don't need their opinion. Sometimes they say, do you have an attorney? It's irrelevant if I have an attorney. but I don't have a criminal attorney. I might have a family attorney. I don't have a criminal attorney, and I don't need one to report a crime. You wouldn't ask someone who was mugged or assaulted, okay, do you have an attorney? We're not going to take your report without an attorney. You wouldn't ask that. So it doesn't make any sense. So again, it's just asserting, your rights and knowing what those are. I tell parents all the time to pull the public records, ask for a policy and procedural manual on how law enforcement are supposed to report crimes. And it'll break it down, what they're supposed to do when they get to the scene, whether it's a felony or misdemeanor, what they're supposed to do, what form they're supposed to use. It's all in there, and parents can get this through public records request. They can also get it through, sometimes it's on a website. It's sometimes called general orders or general manual, but you can get that and you could use that as a guide of this is what they're supposed to be doing and this is what they're not doing, and get a report.
So Claudia, we were talking about custodial interference and time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that apply to if any information is being withheld or if you are not listed on, important medical documents or anything like that with the children? Or is this specifically we're talking about just time?
Yeah, this is specifically to a court-ordered visitation or a parenting plan. It doesn't cover, well, my communication is being interfered. That's not what this is. It's about actual parenting time, physical parenting time with the child.
I think that's good to define because all of that is in our agreements, right? That can all be found in our agreements. However, we're just talking about the specific time with the child that you're missing out on.
Right.
Thank
right.
you for the clarification. Mm-hmm. So what are some, interventions that can be used to address the underlying issues that lead to custodial interference?
What can be some interventions that lead to this, or I'm sorry, can you rephrase your question again?
Sure. Yeah. What are some interventions that can be used to address the underlying issues that lead to this or led to custodial interference? So is there anything like red flags, right? Or is there anything that you can identify?
A lot of it starts with the child, the parent telling you the child doesn't want to go, things like that, and then not agreeing to the visits, the time, even though you can specify, or it's been specified what the plan is, the parenting plan is, and then other things that they could do. They could file a false allegation. That's custodial interference, especially when it's false, and they'll do that as a tactic so that the child doesn't go with you. And then you got to go through all this process, and by the time that's resolved, the visitation has expired. Your summer has expired, and that's another thing that you could pursue if parents knew about these penal codes. There's penal codes for false allegations. There's penal codes for false reporting. There's penal codes for perjury. But everything that we're told is that it has to be resolved in family court, and that's not true.
Yeah.
And so I just encourage parents to just Google custodial interference and your state name, and you'll find your state penal code. Google your perjury penal code, false reporting, false allegations. You can Google all that and find it.
I'm curious, you said that you don't need a criminal attorney because we do invest so much into our family law attorneys, and you don't need an attorney to file this. How much time, effort, documentation, all of that does it take for a person to do this and come up with this and report it correctly?
So you need the willingness of the other party to violate the order. So if you had our family wizard, screenshot or a printout where you stated you were going to exercise your rights for this visitation, well, our family wizard timestamps when they read it. That's the acknowledgement. They've seen it. They read it. You expressed that you were going to exercise your visits. You've bought tickets. You've notified them. So that's the willingness of the other parent who goes, when they go against that, that's the willingness that they are doing to commit the crime. Then you need the actual police report, the correct police report. And then you need your court order. A lot of parents might have their court order on their phone. It might be a PDF, and law enforcement will try their hardest to just not give you a report. And because and the reason that they deny you is they're either unfamiliar, they're undertrained, and they don't have the education on this penal code. They don't cover it for a very long time in when they go through the academy. But it is introduced in the academy, is what I've researched. Also, they may have been told, we don't take these cases. The district attorney may tell the police or the sheriff, don't take these cases. And so in part of my advocacy, we had a group of parents that would have the same experience. So we banded together and we met with our state legislator, and he brought us all to the table. He brought the sheriff and he brought the district attorney, and he said, okay, what's going on? Because police say you will not prosecute, and then you say you will not prosecute because police won't write up these reports. What is it? And so he brought us all to the table, and they said, we do prosecute. And so we kind of worked it all out because it just kept kicking the can around. But back to your question, it's the willingness of the other parent or party, because sometimes it can be an individual, it can be a grandparent that's withholding the child. And you can have that proof like a screenshot or something, and then the report, and then your court order, and just making sure that it is most valid and up to date. And like you had mentioned, Mick, they gave you a hard time because you didn't have the seal on the document for them to feel that raised seal. Many parents don't realize that when we're reporting a crime, we can be held for lying or for perjuring ourselves by reporting falsely. So in that sense, why would I give you something that wasn't valid? I understand that I could be getting into trouble for reporting, a false report. So I'm willing to say, this is what I have. This is a valid report.
So Claudia, sorry to interrupt. So when you go back to the three things, the willingness of the other party, which is just acknowledgement, basically, that they saw that you're going to pick up the child, a police report, the right police report, and a court order. Do you take that one instance, or do you need to build a case before you go and try to prosecute?
You need to build a case. So that's what you use at the scene of the crime, when your parenting time is being interfered. You use that so you could make sure you get the report. But once you have the report, you want to follow up. You can't wait for them to contact you, because they're not really gonna push to contact you because they want you to go away. They already have so many cases that they're investigating, that one less case would probably be best for them. So you need to stay on top of what's the status of your case.
So the case is, when you're saying case, it's just that one instance. It doesn't have to be several instances built up, right? You're following that one police report all the way through. I just want to make sure everybody understands. Okay.
Yeah, and so you follow it through, and if another one occurs, I always get a business card from the officer. I'll get his name, a badge number. I will get the report number that he gives me, because he's going to go back and he's going to enter everything. And by the end of the evening, he's going to have his supervisor sign off on it or something, and things like that. And so once he notates whatever he notates, I follow up a couple of days later. I want to know who got assigned to my case, because at that point, that's when they're going to call you in and get your statement from you as a victim of a crime. And that's where you can actually give them a paper copy of your order. You can give them that Our Family Wizard printout, and you can give anything else that you may have. Maybe you have an instance, well, maybe a parent has reported this before and they thought they got a report, but they just got an incident number. I've had it where I turned those incident numbers into offense reports, because I finally learned what this was, and there is a statute of limitations to report this. So I didn't want to forget that. But in most states, it's 2 or 3 years. In Texas, it's 3 years. You have a statute of limitations. It varies by state, but because I may have reported it 6 months ago, but I didn't learn about it until now, I can go back and say, hey, I reported this 6 months ago. I want that included too. That was another occurrence. And so they can look at that and say, you know what? Yeah, she did report it. And I always tell parents, don't leave without some form of documentation. Otherwise, it's he said, she said, and you want some form of documentation.
Good to know. Great. Well, Mick, sorry, I screwed us up because I got us all
No,
off track
no,
again.
right. It's good stuff and it's great information. But I do have another question for how can enforcing custodial interference promote a healthier co-parenting relationship? And this is always, I think, the reluctance of a person of trying to get involved because they think they're causing more disruption. But I think what you want to show is how is this actually healthier for a co-parenting relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mick, because
Well,
it's true because you think that if you file this incident report,
Mhm.
or now we're learning that it's not just an incident report, it is a offense report.
mhm.
You file this, it's only going to make things worse with your ex,
Yes.
right? And that's how it is in my mind, Mick. So this is a great question. I'm excited to hear the answer.
Yes.
Drum roll,
Good
please. Here
one.
we go.
Right. So, and I know that could be an issue for some, some parents, but for some of us that are not getting any type of relief in family court, this is like our last effort to try to have that relationship with the child before they get older, before they
All right.
start putting them in that position to just reject us over and over. And they're going to end up calling the other parent and they're going to want to get their statement during this as well. And I think that when you show that how serious you are, that, oh my gosh, I could be facing a felony or a misdemeanor, I don't want that, let me, and that's what it's taken for a couple of parents, is like they didn't want to do this anymore, and they didn't want to get in trouble. So that next thing you know, they started showing up and exchanging the children, and there were no issues. But for those parents that are very, they just refuse and they're just not compliant, this is just an option. And it's not like I'm committing the crime, I'm trying to get the other parent in trouble. They're actually committing it themselves. I'm just reporting the crime. I want the relationship and I want to see the child. And that's kind of why I started enforcing it, because I wasn't getting the relief in family court, and many of us aren't. But it could cause those issues for some parents, because they'll see it as you're causing trouble, you're stirring trouble. I'm just reporting a crime and I have a right to do that.
And so I'm very interested then, what is the role of going back to family court? So if this incident's reported and now you're going down a criminal aspect of it, what happens, what is the role of the courts on the family side of things to enforce? Does it make them enforce a little bit more? Does it open their eyes? Does it make them back off? Is it two different separate issues, which is typically what happens, right? But I'm sure we're all human, so I'm sure the judge knows, the guardian ad litem knows,
Right.
attorneys know what's going on. So how does that play a role into then how the court reacts to kind of enforce or not enforce? Do they back off? What happens?
Well, I know that many parents have tried reporting this to their judge. They've
Mhm.
tried reporting the criminal code to their judge, and they'll say this is not a court for that. This is different jurisdictions, which is really strange, because they can also pick and choose what they want to hear. If it was a CPS or a child abuse situation, they're going to resolve it right there. Why wouldn't they resolve a criminal code that relates to the visitation that you had a ruling over? So many times when you bring this in, the other attorney is going to, try to smear you that you're just causing issues and informing the judge, look, they're the one that's causing problems. And then your attorney has to say, well, the parent just reported this crime. Many times your own attorney may not like that you're doing this. They don't want you to call police. They don't want you to cause these issues, because it's just going to make it more difficult for them. But parents have a right to do this. And if I'm not getting a remedy from a contempt or an enforcement, then this is what I'm going to do. This is an option. And attorneys, many of them will not tell you that this law exists, because they're family attorneys, or they don't know criminal code, and they want you to continue to retain them to pursue this relief in family court. Because when you file this criminal, you don't need an attorney. You do this all yourself. You advocate for yourself. It's no different, again, like if you were robbed, you would report a crime. If you got a car accident, you would make the report. So it's no different than that. They just don't tell you that this has existed because they either don't know or they want you to keep coming back.
Mhm.
One of the things that I'm curious about, since you have such a wide breadth and background on different states, this is one of the things that I was really interested in finding out too. In what states are there some important bills that people should be following? Because this is one of the complexities that we found at Kinder, and I said, well, we've got 50 states. So what states and what bills would you recommend? Because if we have listeners, they might be in that state and maybe they can get involved legislatively.
Well, I'm glad you asked. So in this past session, I passed a bill here in Texas. I was successful in doing that. And it was a bill that it pertains to custodial interference, but it actually gives law enforcement a tool. And so, again, we don't want to make the other parent a felon, but we want accountability. We want to ensure that the child is seeing both parents. So the bill that I passed was HB 969 in Texas, and it's on custodial interference, but it's actually it would allow a municipality to enact a city ordinance or a county to issue an order so that law enforcement could actually citate the parent at the scene of the crime. So again, it's not mandatory for the city or the county to create an ordinance or the order, but it allows them to choose. And so right now I'm trying to get my city council to pass and enact the ordinance based on the law. So I started 2 years ago, and then I just kind of stayed on top of it, having these relationships with legislators, keeping the city on board, keeping the county on board. And then as the bill moved and had success passing certain committees, just letting them know this is where it's at. And here it's, it's passed this committee, it's now in the Senate, all those things. So what the bill would do, and the most important thing is ensuring the child sees the other parent, but the bill is a tool for law enforcement, because for those law enforcement that come out to the scene of the crime, they don't want to get involved. They don't know all the dynamics and the details. So this is just really simple. Who's supposed to have the child, and are you retaining the child? That's it. And I can write you a ticket. It's like a speeding ticket. They go to municipal court. It actually tracks this a little better than just having a whole bunch of paper trail, because now it's in their system that the parent has committed this, and they can find them. It can be anywhere from $0 to $500 per occurrence, and it'll lower long-term the domestic violence statistics, because like I mentioned, we have 1,000 of these a month. It gives law enforcement that tool. It also mitigates the amount of time that law enforcement are at that scene of the crime, because chances are more than likely it's me trying to get my word in, the other person trying to get their word in, and they're there for like an hour. So it mitigates them being there. That way they can go off to another call. And it's just a better way to ensure that the law is enforced. No, it doesn't take away from the felony. That still remains there for egregious cases, but now they have a tool, because we know that this has been an issue. I pulled public records all over the state, and that's what we use to get the bill passed.
Congratulations. That's huge. And I just want to pause there and thank you for all those parents that needed that passed in Texas. So thank you for your time and your dedication, because that's a huge lift on your shoulders. And I appreciate you looking past your story and your situation and helping other families in the future. You're making it.
So right now, Florida is trying, Pennsylvania is trying, California. I drafted a bill for California, and a mother wants to get involved. So it's going to be about her making those connections and taking over, pushing that bill. And it could be something as simple as changing a word. Like in California, their law uses the word malicious. How are you going to prove malicious? Law enforcement says we can't prove. How are we going to prove malicious? We can't prove that. So it's taking something out like malicious and maybe putting willingly. Willingly is, retaining the child. I think those were the two words we were going to swap out. And it's just building these relationships. But parents need to get involved. It can't just be one person, because then it's just, you're the only one having the problem. No one else. We never hear from anyone else. And it's just getting those parents to attend those meetings. I didn't learn about this until I went to a town hall, and I met a sheriff. They sat the sheriff across from me, and he explained, what kind of report did you get? and I said, as a parent, how do I know that there are options? And he says, you need an offense report. He was the one who told me, you don't need an incident report, you need an offense report. And so he said, that's when I went back and I said, I want my offense report. And it's just building those relationships and talking to these elected officials.
And I think that's big because anybody who's been through it and maybe has adult alienated children, maybe they could give back by connecting with their state senators and digging into this and starting to change the law, enforcing criminally. And I think you made a good point too that I just want to go back to and remind everybody, if a parent goes this route, it's because they're at their wits' end. They want to see their children. They want a relationship. It is not to send the other parent to jail or get a felony or a misdemeanor against them. It is simply enforcing their own rights so they can have a relationship with their child. And in the end, ultimately, the child won't have emotional abuse from it, right? And have any lasting effects from not seeing their parent, not being a part of their lives. Because let's face it, a child has both parents' DNA. So
Right.
if a child is being taught to hate the other parent, it has to be emotional abuse because it's part of them, right? And they are part of that parent. So it's almost kind of hating themselves in a way. So we have to be very, very sensitive to that. So I think this is a good way to prevent long-term emotional abuse to children when they become adults. So I just want to make that very clear, though. Intentions, if a parent files this, is not to throw the other person in jail, is not to commit the felony. They simply just want the rights with their child.
Right. And we've noticed on the power and control wheel, there is a section for use of a child. And one of the very last factors or that it states is violating visitation, interfering with visitation. Because oftentimes when they're using the child, it's using the child to hurt us, to weaponize against us by damaging that relationship. And that's where we think about the needs of the child. The child needs both parents. They need to see both parents. They need to receive praise and love and know that we're here and we want to have that relationship. And when you deny that, you're not looking at what it's actually doing to them long term. So this is just something that, you know, I pursued, and when I got the law passed, it was amazing. But between then and now is just educating parents and them not realizing it, and them wanting to jump on board and do something in their state, and they've just taken off with it. When I learned about it in Texas, it was just a group of us, but I was wondering, why aren't we making these connections on this with alienation? Because this is one of the beginning factors is when you deny that relationship, when you start withholding the child from seeing the other parent. And then we kind of just expanded a little bit, and then, you know, making one private page group in California, and then next thing you know, we have private group pages in all 50 states, and parents take over those groups and they start leading this movement. And we did it that way because every state law is so different, and they need to start banding together.
Mm-hmm. So along those same lines, can you tell us a little bit about what your movement is called and how to get involved?
Sure. So our national movement is Interference with Child Custody Coalition. We named it a coalition because everyone needs to work together. This is a national, because it's a national issue. It begins with at the state level. It was a national or federal law that was passed that enacted all these state laws. So it's Interference with Child Custody Coalition, and then the Florida group is named after their penal code. Same with Texas, California, North Dakota, Alaska. And on our page, we educate parents on these issues. We'll find stories where there was a case of a custodial interference, and we share it with them. They may not be aware of what it is, and maybe a parent that abducted a child, crossed state lines, things like that. But they need to know that these cases are actually being reported. So why aren't their cases being, accepted? And it's really about understanding the law and how to enforce the law through the criminal code of procedure, which is what law enforcement is supposed to be doing. I didn't know all this when I started. I didn't know this probably I got started over 2.5 years ago. And I just, any little thing that I picked up and I learned, I passed it on. There are manuals from the DOJ on this. There's the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they have actual procedures, preventive measures that you could take, what to do when law enforcement, denies you. So this has been out there forever, and this has been promoted and funded by, Amber Alerts. The DOJ sends those grants. They also send training grants to law enforcement on these issues. And so the information is out there. There's been studies. There was I believe a study back in the 90s, and their findings was that there needs to be more training because this is occurring so often, and that was in the 90s. So
Right.
we're just trying to get everybody on board because of the awareness. We've talked to legislators, and they said no one has never told us and never brought this up to us before, and that's what we're trying to encourage parents to do. And it can be a little overwhelming, wanting to speak to your legislator, but they're just like us. They just ran for office. They're parents, and they probably have known someone that was divorced, and it's likely maybe they're having these issues also. So
Well, I think too is when you go through this as a parent and you're targeted, then you have different stages that your emotions run through, right? And so I think to boil it down and make it very simple for the ones that are in the grind right now, in the, custody battle, how do you come out of that emotion? Because you're putting so much emotional, what I want to say, buildup of your tank, right? Daily into talking to your attorney and different things. So how do you separate that out and say, you know what, I'm going to take this criminal direction, right? And when do you make that decision? Because it sounds like we're kind of on our own to do that, which is good for those that fight it. And then, as you get further along and maybe your adult children, or it's happened to you, or maybe you're too far down the path, or, maybe things have changed. Maybe you become that advocate that you're talking about for all the states and go speak to legislator because you're not in the emotional grind of it anymore. So you can kind of separate that and tell your story. And it can still be very emotional, don't get me wrong, but probably have a little better outsider view of it or what you could have done differently. And I think be able to tell your story to senators maybe a little bit better. So if you can maybe touch on that.
Sure. So it does, you do need to be in the right, I would say mental state. You have to, because it is overwhelming. Family court is overwhelming. You have so many hardships, financial hardships, emotional hardships. So you kind of have to be in the right place to do this.
Yeah. I mean, there's several people I talk to that grown men and fathers, and my heart breaks. I mean, I'm a mother, but to watch them break down and cry and say, I've put my whole 401k, all my financial assets, anything that I built up into paying for this. And they're crying and they're like, I still don't see my kids. What else can I do? And there is no right answer out there. Nobody has the answer, but I think, Claudia, you're onto something that we haven't heard.
Right. And so, and this was my form of therapy for myself, is that I needed a distraction because of the outcome of my case. And so I used that to find something else to focus on. And it was something as little as meeting with parents. And then that shifted to, let's do this. And then that shifted to, let's keep growing. Let's keep pushing this. And so that became my distraction. And it was no longer about my child, because even doing this now, it's not going to change the outcome, but at least I know that I'm doing something. And this is something that I can control. This is not something that the other parent can take away from me. This is something that I've been able to learn on my own, and it has nothing to do with my child or the relationship. It's just something that it's allowed me to drive forward, educating parents on something. And I truly believe if I had known about this years ago, it would have changed my outcome. And it's unfortunate that you don't find these things out until it's too late. But this doesn't have to be too late for every parent. So when I talk about advocating for the children, this is what I mean. This could prevent all the hurdles that we have to go through in family court and check off all those boxes. Let's get to that point and make sure that kids are seeing the other parent like they should. And and getting a little bit more accountability than what we're getting, or a lot more accountability than what we're getting in family court. And it's just being in that right state. If you can focus on advocacy, if you can volunteer your time, that'd be great. And again, it's a really good distraction. You meet a lot of, a lot of parents along the way, really good parents that are just passionate about doing something.
And I
And
think it's good support and therapy for those parents too, right? For everybody involved, because you can relate. So you have friends. Mick always says this, and he says it better than me, but you have friends that you tell and they look at you like you have two heads. Like, what did you do wrong? Why doesn't your child want to talk to you anymore? Right. And then you have people you meet along the way in this journey and they can totally relate and you feel very vulnerable and you can open up and really share. And I think that's therapy for all of us.
yeah. And it's very meaningful. It's become so meaningful that you're just helping, another parent, a child, and you're growing, you're still growing. And I mean, my son knows that I do this. And one of the last things I recall him saying was when they asked him, describe your mom, he said, my mom cares. My mom's caring. And that just stuck with me because I knew that no matter what happened, he knew who I was. And that's why I do this.
Well, Claudia, thank you so much for sharing. You made me tear up just now. Your son's realizing what you're doing, and that's great because that is probably your biggest reward, right? You're helping other parents and families and changing things, but your biggest reward is your son seeing what you are actually doing, and that's great. So, do you have Facebook groups? Do you have websites? How can people reach out?
Sure. So our website is heroesforchildrensrights.org. I named it Heroes because my focus was on the impact this had to our military service members. They're often, we don't speak about how this impacts them a lot and how custodial interference affects them. They deploy a lot, they TDY a lot, and they already have those challenges. And then to have these ones when they return is really hard for them. So I named it Heroes for Children's Rights. Our Facebook page is Interference with Child Custody Coalition. Right now, you can probably find us if you do the hashtag It's Not a Civil Matter. That's our campaign that's going on this month in October because it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And because custodial interference is a crime under family violence, where we created this campaign where you would hold up a sign that said it's not a civil matter, because that's the number one response that law enforcement tells you. It's a civil matter. And so our campaign is It's Not a Civil Matter. And we have received a lot of parents that send us a photo, and you don't have to show your face. It's just a sign, a handmade sign, hashtag It's Not a Civil Matter. And so you can probably find us if you search for that right now. But we're also on TikTok. I do have other parents that are helping me run these pages and advocate. I mean, really great parents. And sometimes I get a chance to meet them in person. I do travel, but when I'm in a certain area, I'll go out of my way and meet one, and we'll hug, we'll talk about our situations. But really good parents out there that are advocating really hard for this. So I do want to give a little shout out to them because they do amazing. And so that's kind of where we are. And then NPO. If you're not involved with National Parents Organization, they have chapters all over the U.S. And I really recommend parents get involved, especially if you want to follow some of the concerns that they're doing. They do some really good advocacy. We probably can all say that we've fall under some of the things that are important to them: the shared parenting, custodial interference, the parental alienation awareness, things like that. So.
And they too, I think, have some of the research that you're talking about for the state specifically, on how many domestic violence, has been reported. They do some of that research as well. So it's not like you have to do it yourself. You can reach out and get that from them too. Right.
Yeah. They're very amazing. Work with them quite a bit. We did it for legislation. Other states that are affiliated with, other parents or advocates that are affiliated with National Parents Organization, they're just really involved, and it's a really good organization to be a part of. So I really recommend parents, reach out, follow them, get their newsletter. You'll see a lot of stuff that they're putting out and they're doing. Another great organization.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claudia. That's like a wealth of knowledge and things that I think were very unique and something that is absolutely needed. Like I said, almost at the very beginning, I'm almost shocked that this has been in all 50 states for 4 decades. And this is like something that people just don't know about. So we really appreciate all the things that you were able to share, and also that fighting spirit. So let's get the troops, let's get them motivated and get out there and do some good.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for being on with us today. Really appreciate it. It's very touching. So
You're
you
welcome.
can tell I'm kind of all jumbled up about it, right? You've shared so much. It's just enlightening. And it's like, where do we go from here?
Right. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Claudia. Appreciate your time and all your expertise.
Thank you.
All right. And so if you have liked the information, which I'm sure you have, make sure that you are liking, subscribing, sharing, and positively reviewing the Aftermath, especially on Apple Podcasts. So if you want more good guests like Claudia and others, we got a lot more coming your way. Thanks for all your support. Until next time, Deus Volt.